You never know when the growth is going to happen. You never know when things are going to click.
That was Rockets head coach Steven Silas after he and his team returned home from what could only be described as a productive road trip, nearly even a little bit more productive were it not for one Wardell Stephen Curry. Good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to the Fox 26 Sports Stream. As always, I'm Sal Manine, sports producer here at Fox 26. We'll get into the Rockets, where things stand. They got a bit of a reprieve this week as they're home all week, only have a couple games, so they're able to get a lot of practice time in, which is valuable for a team as young and inexperienced as the Rockets are. But we'll, of course, talk all things Texans, the NFL, with arguably the greatest playoff weekend in its history, which the Texans are quite a ways away from being a part of. But we'll get into where things stand in the head coaching search. We'll check in on the Rockets as they approach the trade deadline. And then the UH men's basketball team stays in the top 10 nationally as what can only be described as a masterful job by Kelvin Sampson and his staff, despite all the injuries they've had, managing to get to 17-2, still perfect in American Athletic Conference play. So let's start with the NFL. And of course, everybody's still coming down from the high that was not just Chiefs Bills and one of the greatest games you will ever see in the NFL playoffs. Certainly a game that'll go down there that you can just talk about years from now and be, remember the Mahomes Allen game, or remember when Mahomes only had 13 seconds on the clock. It'll go right up there with the catch or the drive or so many other seminal moments from NFL history. But all weekend, we were treated to some down to the wire and heart-stopping finishes as the Final Four is now set. In the AFC, of course, it'll be the Chiefs for the fourth year in a row in the AFC title game. They will host Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, who knocked off Ryan Tannehill and the top-seeded Titans in what was a very sloppy game, but Joe Burrow and company taking their talents all the way to the AFC Championship. And in the NFC title game, which, of course, you can watch right here on Fox 26, it'll be the Los Angeles Rams hosting the San Francisco 49ers. But the Texans right now are still trying to find a head coach and somebody that they hope can one day soon lead them back to the playoffs. Forget even getting to a conference championship, something this franchise has still never done. Thus far, after the departure of David Culley, this is what we know. The Texans have already interviewed 5 candidates. These are the names that the team themselves has said they have already completed interviews with. Brian Flores, of course, former head coach of the Dolphins, longtime Patriots assistant, has a strong relationship with Texans general manager Nick Caserio and executive vice president of football operations Jack Easterby, going back to their days with the New England Patriots. Hines Ward, yes, that Hines Ward, the famous Steelers wide receiver, now a receivers coach at Florida Atlantic down in Miami. Joe Lombardi, grandson of Vince Lombardi. He's currently Justin Herbert's offensive coordinator with the LA Chargers, has also been the OC for Matt Stafford and the Lions. Longtime NFL assistant Jonathan Gannon, defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, who had a top 10 unit in terms of NFL defensive rankings this past season. And a name that has really caught everybody's attention, Josh McCown. Yes, that is the same Josh McCown you are probably thinking of. Longtime NFL journeyman, mostly a backup quarterback, of course, was a Texas legend in the high school ranks and went on to a very successful career at Sam Houston State before carving out nearly a 20-year career in the NFL, which is certainly something to be applauded. Yet for the second year in a row, the Texans have interviewed him for their head coaching position, despite the fact he has no coaching experience. He's been a volunteer assistant coach at the high school level a couple times, even while he was still technically on an NFL roster. When he had free time or wasn't playing or in the off season, he was volunteering with high school in the high school ranks, but has never been a college forget even head coach, position coach, coordinator, and nothing at the NFL level. Now, everything you read, anyone who's ever talked to Josh McCown, who's ever been a teammate of him, speaks very highly of him. Everybody loves him. He's got a great mind, understands the game. Certainly, if you are going to stick around and collect a paycheck for close to 2 decades, you have to know something about the X's and O's of football. But the Texans are not in a position where anybody's going to give them the benefit of the doubt right now. So if they're seriously considering Josh McCown to be the head guy, meaning be essentially the CEO of your franchise without any experience as a coordinator or position coach, having put in the time or paid his dues, it's going to make a lot of people scratch their heads. And again, the Texans have not earned the right with the way they've been run and the way things have gone for them over the last several years. They've not earned the benefit of the doubt for anyone. So if this is just a matter of they're using this time to interview people who they might be interested in at some point to be some type of coach or a part of their coaching staff, and to an extent Hines Ward falls under this category as well, then maybe that's why you're talking to a Josh McCown or a Hines Ward. But you cannot seriously be considering, with all the rebuilding you have to do, the state of your franchise as it is, and the trajectory that you will have to follow as a team in the AFC, meaning in the same conference as a Mahomes and a Josh Allen and a Herbert and a Joe Burrow. You can't be going out and trying to seriously give the reins to Josh McCown, who has no experience sitting in the big chair before. As for the names that we did mention, here's who the Texans have interviewed thus far. And then it's been reported, the team has yet to confirm that they've actually interviewed him, but there have been several reports that Kevin O'Connell, the current LA Rams offensive coordinator, the Texans have asked for permission to speak with him. As far as we know, that interview has not yet happened. In all the NFL teams, not just the Texans, pretty much every team that has a head coaching vacancy, once they actually interview someone, which in today's day, that first interview can almost always be done on Zoom or some type of virtual setup, all the teams make an announcement that we've spoken to this individual. So Kevin O'Connell, perhaps because his team is still playing, maybe that's why it hasn't happened as of yet. Maybe by the end of this week, the Texans will have spoken with him, but he's been the offensive coordinator for the Rams for the past 2 seasons, was the OC in Washington a year before that. He's been an NFL assistant coach since 2015. The only Patriots ties, since we like to joke about that with the Texans, who swear they're not trying to be Patriots South. The only Pat's ties is that he started his NFL career after he was drafted in 2008 with the Patriots, actually played in a game in mop-up duty as a rookie in 2008, but did not, nothing materialized beyond that as far as a lengthy NFL playing career. But he's been an assistant for years. Of course, Sean McVay's coaching tree has blown up the last several years, and so many people who either are head coaches now in the NFL or have gotten looks are guys who cut their teeth at some point under McVay. Of course, the big question, if you are going to bring in a guy who is the OC on paper in LA, everybody knows Sean McVay runs things on the offensive side. So just as you talk about all the Patriots guys over the years who have gotten looks and gotten calls and gotten head coaching jobs because they were in the room with Belichick and Brady or both of them, there's always going to be that question, well, just how much of the Rams' success offensively the last few years is as a result of Kevin O'Connell, or is it really Sean McVay who's calling the shots? And if you're the Texans or any of the other teams who have reportedly reached out to Kevin O'Connell, it's a matter of what did he pick up from being so close to McVay. So that's a name that you should hear something about in the coming days. And then there have been some reports out there that one of the candidates who the Texans have already brought in, Jonathan Gannon, the Texans are trying to set up a second interview with him. And this would be the first person that we know of who the Texans would be bringing back a second time around to interview a second time, which typically means you're on the short list, you're a candidate, a finalist rather, for the job. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Eagles DC this past season, they ranked 10th in total defense in the league this year. Before that, he does have some familiarity with the AFC South, having been defensive backs coach in Indy for 3 seasons. And he's been an NFL assistant or a few years as a scout. He's worked on some type of coaching or personnel staff for almost a decade and a half. Despite only being 39 years old, Jonathan Gannon is a guy who's been around and has worked his way up the ranks. And all the reports you read out there, not just pertaining to the Texans, but even some of the other teams that Jonathan Gannon has spoken with, he blows the interview out of the water. Everybody loves him. He's a name that is supposedly trending upwards in NFL coaching circles. And so remains to be seen if he is a guy who the Texans do, in fact, bring in for a second interview. One name we have not heard yet linked to the Texans, though it probably should be, is the guy who's in charge of one of those teams that I mentioned is still playing football and is in the Final Four, so to speak. And that's a name that Texans fans know well, DeMeco Ryans, the current defensive coordinator for the 49ers, which if you watch not just this past weekend in Green Bay, but even the first week of the playoffs, what the Niners were able to do defensively against Dak Prescott and this high-powered Dallas offense. DeMeco Ryans is a name who rightfully should be getting phone calls, and there have been reports of several different teams reaching out to a guy who is a Texans great, behind J.J. Watt, arguably the second best defensive player in Texans history. Of course, he started his career with the Texans, where he made an all-pro team, was Rookie of the Year in 2006. After a decade-long playing career, moved into the coaching side. He's been an assistant with the 49ers for each of the past 5 seasons. And when you have a defense that's been getting the job done the way the Niners have, and it's not just been these past 2 weeks, that's been a good defensive unit all season long and really the last few seasons. But especially when you see this is a team that people are saying, hey, they're kind of frisky. Don't be surprised if they mess around and somehow stumble their way or perhaps deservedly put themselves in the Super Bowl the way they've been playing. DeMeco Ryans is a name the Texans should have called even before this started, but certainly with how things have gone the last 2 weeks, I'm still surprised we've yet to hear anything about the Texans actually reaching out to DeMeco Ryans for an interview. So we will keep you updated on all that as it pertains to the Texans and the head coaching search. Again, we know that they've spoken with 5 names thus far, with Kevin O'Connell set to interview at some point in the future based on reports, and we'll see where things go from there. All right, I do want to talk some college hoops. The new rankings came out today. U of H still in the top 10. They check in at number 7 in the Associated Press poll, number 9 in the coaches top 25 in the NCAA net rankings. Remember, this is what the tournament selection committee uses to round out the field of 68 and then seed them. U of H is 3rd in the country, which is impressive considering they don't have the luxury of playing a schedule where week in and week out they're playing other teams that are highly ranked in the net rankings. And then Ken Pomeroy, if you're into college hoops, that's a name you're familiar with. I'm a big believer in the Ken Pom rankings, and those are one of the many metrics that the committee does use in terms of how they evaluate teams come selection time. U of H ranks 4th overall in Ken Pom. And in adjusted offense, so this is Ken Pom takes into account all, I think it's 358 teams in Division I men's basketball, and then adjust the rankings and the numbers based on the conference, strength of schedule, arena, location, all that kind of stuff. So even adjusting for everything, U of H still ranks 9th offensively in the country in Ken Pom's rankings and 13th in the country in adjusted defense. So no surprise that U of H is still in the top 10 with the record they have and still perfect in conference play. What might be a bit of a surprise is, given the number of injuries they've had, including their best all-around player, Marcus Sasser, arguably their biggest, or the guy with the most upside coming into the year. Kelvin Sampson was on John Rothstein's podcast today, and he said that Tremont Mark was their best playmaker. Those two are both out for the season with season-ending surgery. Jamal Shedd, starting point guard, was thought to be lost for at least a week or two, or maybe longer, after rolling his ankle badly at Tulsa. And then just a few games later, what U of H is calling a miracle, Jamal Shedd was able to come back and play, and U of H is still finding ways to win. Here's Kelvin Sampson from this past weekend after his team not only beat East Carolina, thoroughly dominated them from start to finish. One of the best all-around performances, if not the best all-around performance that U of H has had all season long as they move to 6-0 in conference play. Here's Kelvin Sampson.
This program's is built on the shoulders of kids that competed. It's taken this team. This is not the team that started the season. This team started their season early January. So this team's been together for about 3 weeks. And we've had to figure out how we were going to win. But who we are as a program can't change. Playing hard on defense, rebounding, 50-50 balls, that's what the foundation is.
And U of H has this entire week off. They're back in action on Saturday. They visit Central Florida, and that's one of the few opportunities that U of H has remaining this season to really bolster its resume. If you look at the American Athletic Conference, you will see that U of H stands above everybody else when it comes to the net rankings and really the win-loss record too. There's not a lot of opportunities for U of H to add to quad one wins. Remember, that's how they determine the seeding for the NCAA tournament. The net rankings looks at, well, if you beat a team that's in the top 30, I believe, in the net rankings at home, it's quad one. If they're in the top 50 and you beat them on a neutral court, or top 60, then it's a quad one win. Otherwise, quadrant two is teams ranked like 60 to 100, or I forget the exact numbers that they go in, but they break down all 350 some odd teams. But you look at, it's pretty much a down year for the AAC. If U of H, they should safely be into the tournament, barring something just catastrophic happening for the rest of the season. But assuming U of H wins the AAC conference tourney and thus the automatic bid, it's very conceivable that the AAC is a one-bid league this year. You see SMU, who U of H is yet to play, they're 59th in the net rankings. SMU, Cincy, Memphis, and Central Florida, those are all games that U of H is yet to play them. And perhaps if those teams do keep winning, maybe they bolster their own net rankings, thus helping U of H. But you look at the bottom half of the American, and none of those are what are going to jump out to you as impressive wins. And so the fact that U of H is still garnering top 10 support nationally, and they certainly pass the eye test, just if you watch them, shows them the kind of respect that they've earned coming off a Final Four and still finding a way to get to 17 wins despite losing two starters and arguably your two best players. But Kelvin Sampson has pointed out at any point in time, his team could lose, and it's going to be difficult sledding the rest of the way, even though on paper the teams they're playing are not the Dukes and Auburns and Baylors of the world. And look, it's not or a lack of trying that UH finds itself in this position that, on paper, I know Jeff Goodman, veteran college basketball writer, was responding to people on Twitter over the weekend, and he said he still wasn't ranking U of H as highly as others because he says they haven't beat anybody this year who's going to be in the NCAA tournament. Part of that is not U of H's fault. They scheduled the likes of Virginia and Okie State and Oregon and Butler and Hofstra, and it's not their fault that those teams are having down years. But they still managed to play 3 quad one games. The 2 games they lost were both away from the Fertitta Center, lost on the last possession of the game. And in both instances, you could say, well, U of H did not have its full complement of guys, that they were either playing shorthanded or with one or more players who were hurt, and yet they only lost by 1 possession. On the road at Alabama, remember that controversial goaltending or non-goaltending call on what might have been a potential game-tying bucket, and then losing to Wisconsin in a game where they just ran out of time. Freshman Jamal Shed, the point guard, waited too long to get up a potential game-tying shot, and they lost to Wisconsin in a preseason tournament. But they beat Okie State. They destroyed Virginia. They beat Hofstra in the season opener, and that, remember, dramatic come-from-behind victory where they were not playing their best basketball for about 37 minutes and then just turned it on in the final 3 minutes and forced overtime. But they're not going to have many more opportunities to bolster, let's say, that resume that's going to make people go, oh, well, if you're not watching U of H day in and day out, that's why I think you're going to see more people take the attitude of Jeff Goodman or some of the other writers out there that, well, who have they beaten? But they're still finding a way to get it done. Let's get one more from U of H. Here is Jamal Shed a couple days ago after he came back to play with that badly sprained ankle that both he and the trainers are saying it's a minor miracle that he was able to power through and still play. Here's what he had to say about how U of H is still finding a way to get it done.
Culture always prevails, man. And I know we say it a lot. You just interview any guy and they'll talk about the culture, but it's a real thing here. And everybody carries it out. Not one person, not one manager, not one coach, not one player, not one person in this program doesn't have the same culture, same feeling about just winning. And we do whatever it takes to win.
So we'll have much more on the Cougars tonight on Fox 26 News at 9. We'll also have more on the Rockets, who, as I mentioned, coming off that road trip where they had won 4 of 5, almost were able to pick off another win on the road. Saturday night, they took on the Warriors in San Francisco, came down to the final shot where Steph Curry hit a walk-off buzzer beater, and in that instance, against a future Hall of Famer, all you can really do is tip your hat. But in terms of, we talk about U of H passing the eye test, the Rockets passed the eye test the last couple of weeks with the way they've been playing. You can see they're making improvements. And that game that they lost to the Warriors might be one of the ones in the long run, if you're a Rockets fan, that, let's say, come lottery night when the ping pong balls are popping and they pull them out, and if it ends up in a number 1 or top 3 pick for the Rockets, maybe as a Rockets fan, you're going, all right, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world that Steph Curry was able to steal one and help your lottery chances going down to the wire. Remember, the bottom 3 teams in the standings all have the same odds to get the number 1 pick, which could be a Jabari Smith from Auburn, the new number 1 team in the country. And if you have not gotten the chance yet to watch him play, I highly recommend it. That game against Kentucky this weekend was wild. But Jabari Smith, Paulo Banchero from Duke, Chet Holmgren from Gonzaga, who I'm not as high on, but that's a name who a lot of people around the NBA and the college hoops world have known for a few years now. Those are the kinds of guys, if you're the Rockets, that you want to still do your best to try to bring into the fold as you continue this rebuild. One of the guys who is likely not going to be part of the rebuild is Eric Gordon, who is playing some of the best basketball of his career, and a big reason why the Rockets have been playing better as of late. And a guy who a lot of teams around the NBA, especially if you are one of the ones that's maybe a piece or 2 away from taking that next step in the playoffs, from trying to find what's going to put us over the top to win a game in April and May and try to get to an NBA Finals. Eric Gordon's the kind of guy you want, who can start or come off the bench, who can play on or off the ball, who can attack the rim or be a spot-up shooter, and who, oh, by the way, is also a plus defender and can guard multiple positions. We spoke to Eric about that after practice the other day, the fact that the trade deadline is around the corner. He's playing some of his best basketball right now, and how is he approaching all this?
Probably most efficient. Throughout my career, roles, definitely changed, whether coming off the bench or starting. And, with me, I feel like I adapt to, all my teammates because from the style of play that I have.
Gordon, who's second in the NBA in three-point shooting percentage, may be 33, but he says he's a long way from being done.
I could keep going. I think I could do this for at least another 4 or 5 years for sure. And I'm looking forward to, it doesn't matter what's coming at me. I think I'm ready for it.
And that includes Eric being ready for what may come with a trade deadline just around the corner and being on a team that's focused on developing its young players.
I'm not even thinking or worried about that. Things happen, get traded or not, you still got to play the game of basketball. And I know the situation I'm in.
I know there was a report from Kelly Iko of The Athletic today that the Rockets might be leaning more towards keeping Eric Gordon and even Christian Wood as opposed to trading them at the deadline. You're going to hear a lot of stuff over the next couple of weeks from all over the NBA as the trade deadline gets closer and teams try to throw out different smoke screen. They want to try to bolster the value of a particular player. But I think given Eric Gordon's age and the fact that right now, if you're the Rockets and you find yourself at the bottom of the standings, it's all about trying to give minutes to those young guys, to the likes of Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr., KJ Martin, Jayshawn Tate. Yes, what Eric Gordon brings in terms of experience, professionalism, how he's able to help these young guys, all that's important. But ultimately, you want to play those guys and let them take their lumps, and you figure out just what you do or do not have. And so if you can get something of value in return for an Eric Gordon, you have to make that move, in my opinion, especially when you factor in his injury history. And maybe that's part of the reason that the Rockets haven't, up to this point, gotten an offer that makes them jump up and say, yes, pull the trigger. But I think with the fact that Eric Gordon's playing so well and is healthy right now, you got to try to move him while his stock is highest, as opposed to keeping him on the roster. And by the time, let's say best case scenario, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you are back in the playoff mix, is a 35, 36-year-old Eric Gordon going to have the same impact that he does now? Probably not. So we'll keep our eye on that as February draws closer and the trade deadline comes into focus. Be sure to join us on Fox 26 News at 9 for an interesting story between one Rocket star and one of the stars of their next opponent, the San Antonio Spurs. Mark Berman will have that and a whole lot more for you on Fox 26 News at 9. As always, make sure you're following Mark on Twitter for all the up-to-the-date information, updates, scores, insight on everything in the Houston sports scene. You can find him on Twitter at Mark Berman, Fox 26. That's going to do it for this week of the Fox 26 Sportscast. For all of us here at Fox 26, I'm Sal Manine. We'll see you again next Monday.